We are recording this presentation on Aboriginal land, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the elders of Dharawal country, past and present, and to extend respect to all Indigenous people participating today. Stephen Gagau and I are talking on behalf of PARADISEC about work we've been doing on thinking about digital repatriation in relation to displaced records and diaspora communities. This is part of a larger collaborative project called True Echoes, Reconnecting Cultures with Recordings from the Beginning of Sound. It's funded by the Leverhulme Trust with additional funding from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK. True Echoes is led by the British Library and in partnership with PARADISEC, with the Institute of Papua New Guinea Studies, with the Vanuatu Cultural Centre, Solomon Islands National Museum, IATSIS, New Caledonia's Chibau Cultural Centre, the British Museum, and the Cambridge Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. The project is aiming to reconnect Indigenous communities with historic audio records of sung and spoken cultures of Australia and Oceania. And the recordings are digitised copies of the earliest ethnographic sound recordings, wax cylinders from British expeditions in the region in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The project is also researching these audio collections and building long-term pathways and platforms for sharing documentation and knowledge about Indigenous oceanic cultural heritage. Part of PARADISEC's contribution to this project has been to adapt a digital repatriation device developed by Nick Teberger and Marco La Rosa, which uses a Raspberry Pi miniature computer to broadcast a local Wi-Fi signal where broadband is unreliable or unavailable. PARADISEC is built around the aim of making our collections accessible online and the idea that an archive can be distributed. And we'd like to pay tribute, given today's theme, to Linda Barwick's influential 2004 article, Turning It All Upside Down, Imagining a Distributed Digital Audio-Visual Archive. The Raspberry Pi device also enables something like physical repatriation in digital form for recordings that are no longer playable in their original form on these wax cylinders. The Pi makes it possible for devices to be left in communities so that community members can connect using their mobile phones and access the recordings at any time. For the moment, our plans to work closely in Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands have been restricted by the pandemic. We're continuing development of the Raspberry Pi device and the data loader on that. But in the meantime, the pandemic has given us cause to look closer to home, something we at PARADISEC have been doing already, especially given the large population of people with Pacific Island heritage who live in Australia. We are trying to do some work locally, reconnecting the recordings to speakers of the languages represented on them who live close by. The wax cylinder recordings at the centre of the True Echoes project were recorded as part of imperial expeditions by teams of scientists and ethnographic researchers seeking to document the cultural practices and worlds of people of the Pacific. As these travellers voyaged throughout the Pacific, collecting sounds, songs, speech on their recording devices, they also collected objects and carried what they had assembled back across the seas, where they wrote up their interpretations. In this process, collections were displaced from the cultural context they belonged to, and when the collectors returned home, they were displaced further. Material culture usually went to museums, while recordings of ephemeral culture were moved around and ultimately have ended up in library and archive collections. Institutions in the former centres of empire are increasingly now grappling with this displacement of records of cultural heritage. Reflecting on this, we have been thinking about Anne J. Gilliland's work on displaced records, and she suggests that in a post-national world, it's appropriate to acknowledge, respect, advocate for, and act upon the realities of always in motion diasporas of records, in which multiple parties have rights, interests, and diverging points of view, and that this might be useful in negotiating ownership, protection, and physical relocation of records across complex and contested histories and boundaries, power imbalances, and stewardship capabilities. Just as cultural objects were displaced through the outward movements of Europeans from imperial centres, the people who created the material culture, who sang the songs, told the stories and struck the drums recorded in these historical cylinder recordings, also have long histories of mobility in their region. Just as imperial networks displaced records of culture, also people continue to be mobile and to bring their embodied cultural knowledges with them. Many people from the parts of Papua New Guinea where these wax cylinders were recorded now live in Australia and, of course, beyond. Tracy Banivanua-Marr has characterised this interconnected history as, quote, shaped by networks of exploitation, but also shadowed by the autonomous movements of Indigenous peoples throughout the region, end quote. We've started to think about this work with community members from across the Pacific who are resident in Australia in the context of these histories of interconnection and as useful ways of making sense of cultural materials that have been displaced through colonial histories, and that there may be many ways to reconnect these with living communities, both with people resident in the region where they were originally recorded and with people from those regions who are dispersed throughout the world.
Reconnecting Indigenous cultures to source and originating communities with historical recordings and archival materials in these pandemic times challenges us. So we've looked into collaboration with the diaspora communities through participatory research. Deborah Van Hickeren's book about Vula'a or Hula describes her experience doing anthropological work, fieldwork in the 21st century. In her book, she refers, when you return home, relatives of the people who have gone so far to study may now be living just around the corner. This case refers to Roge and Gulea kila in our diaspora community of PNG here in Sydney. They know about the historical recordings of the C.G. Seligman in the 1904 Cook Daniels expedition of New Guinea in their homelands, but never had the opportunity to hear them. Therefore, amongst the recordings, as you can see there is a song that will be further explained during the presentation, and that is a song called Lekuleku Hula. You will note that there are various names used for hula, and it's in the local pronunciations, but it was documented as hula mostly. So it's Vula'a or kula. So Lekuleku Hula refers to, it's a song that was adopted by the Kula people. And the historical research metadata shows it's Kwaipo Lekuleku, adopted by the Kula vocal group, accompanied by drumming and clapping. The participatory research that we undertook with the diaspora, with Roge and Gulea, actually enhanced that metadata to talk about the Lekuleku song being a ballad often used in an event or by person or a person in this particular case, a historical event, a song about the loss of a warrior in a battle. Typically, these songs refer also to Lekuleku in different forms, but this particular song is about the warrior in the primary dialect of the Hula language, Kalo or Kwaipo. So as recorded, it was the Kwaipo Lekuleku song. We now discover that the song Lekuleku also refers to other songs that explains people's activities, certain times, and events or a feat, and the act of courage and skill demonstrated by the particular person in events are demonstrated. And this is an enactment that Amanda will describe of the Lekuleku song.
So after sitting and listening to these old recordings made more than 100 years ago, and talking with us at length about them, Roge and Gulea offered to prepare the costumes they had brought with them and to perform for us one of the songs that was in a genre already familiar to them from cultural performances in their childhoods. And this is the Lekuleku song that Stephen's just been talking about. And our PARADISEC have a wonderful audio engineer, Jodie Kell, working with us, who's also collaborating with Stephen on a podcast that they produced together. Jodie has overlaid the old recording. So what you'll hear first is this 1904 recording over this footage of Roge and Gulea just outside the Sydney Conservatorium of Music on Gagau land there. Where she's overlaid the old audio on top of their performance, which will fade in as the recording progresses. So we'll just give you a demonstration now of this old and a new performance of the same song. Stephen, do you want to talk about this slide?
Thank you. All right. Further participatory research of these historical recordings are ongoing. And one of the songs that we listened to is with Eileen Bobone. Bobone is at the ANU in Canberra. And we conducted an interview with her regarding one of the songs of the same 1904 Cook Daniels expedition. And it's in the Sinaugoro language, which is an adjacent language group north of Hula and east towards the east of Hula, as you can see in that map. The whole area is about more than 100 kilometers east of Port Moresby. So that's just to put in perspective where these historical recordings were done in the expedition. Jodie and I interviewed Eileen, and as she talks about what it means to her and how she has been able to reconnect her historic indigenous culture through expressing her emotions and personal connection, listening to the song and its significance to her identity and the legacy of her ancestors. She recognizes that it is now time that these historical recordings need to be shared, and at the same time encouraging her people to start collecting and maintaining the culture that she is proud of as an identity. So I will ask Amanda to now play the two excerpts and discuss and conclude this slide. Thank you.
I just kind of felt sad. It's almost like I've lost something and I don't know what it is I've lost just by listening to that. Yeah. So I cannot put my hand on what exactly I've lost. Maybe my father or maybe that or... Yeah, but now it's like I am left with that now. I have lost something and I do not know what it is I've lost. So those type of recordings, very good, very huge value in them. I'm just sorry that it's like, if I can use the word, these are foreigners doing this. And if we could somewhere along the line, Papua New Guineans, take ownership of those, work with you, how rich we could be. But you see, they belong to you. And I don't know how we can, tell you, be nice to you and say, can you share what you have, because this is our identity.
That's right.
So we'll end there with Eileen's words and the sense they give us of the powerful emotions evoked by being reconnected with these old recordings that are still so meaningful today. And also the sense that she gives us of the potential for community members to share across borders through digital distribution these records of culture and culture that is still so meaningful, and to make ongoing use of the sounds from their ancestors.